we talked about the most important lesson in life. As Jesus taught at the Sermon on the Mount or the Sermon on the Plain, he started with the Beatitudes, and this one lesson for us to know was that we need God. The only way that we will understand God and the only way that we'll understand how life works is if we understand that we need Him, and He orchestrates everything so that we would know that clearly. And the text after that, after the Beatitudes, is not just the most important lesson, but now it is the hardest thing to do in life. So he sets it up, the one thing that you need, and then the hardest thing to do. And he wants us to understand the hardest thing to do we cannot do apart from God and His goodness and His grace. I was reading an article recently talking about how times have changed in the past 30, 40 years. And how back in the days of the hippies, it was all about love, right? Tolerance. But as postmodernism came to be, as truth became secondary, it talks about how today it's so interesting that although tolerance is a virtue, there seems to be more enemies today than ever before. And he says this: enemy is the ascending relationship of our time. Terrorism, a presidential election, racial strife are but some of the forces that propel enemy as today's hot stock in a turbulent relationship marketplace. The list of enemies seem to grow endlessly, whether it's radical Muslims, hypocritical Christians, brutal police, entitled blacks, racist whites, environmental wackos, climate change deniers, not to mention Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, and this was written during the campaign. And he says this: interestingly, we are defined now by the enemies we hate. Isn't that true? It's so different than 20 years ago. That today it's about this political divide or whatever divide that there is, and the way that we identify ourselves is not necessarily what we're for, but it seems to be what we're against or who we're against. And so all the more I do think, and as of late, it is more challenging, it is more difficult to love your neighbor, because the common culture around us is actually hatred. It's pride, it's arrogance, it's if you don't think the way that I think, I don't have to like you. I'll actually disagree with you. And so with that, what do? And Jesus addresses that. He knew the plight of man. He knew our hearts. And just after he talks about the most important lesson, you need God in your life, he talks about the hardest thing to do, to love your enemy. So open up your Bibles to Luke 27. If you don't have a Bible, we have Bibles in the sides for you. If you don't have a Bible at all, it's our gift to you. We do believe this is how God speaks and reveals Himself to us. But in this passage, I want you to be able to see that Jesus understands our hearts. He does not speak this thinking that it's easy to do. But as you have heard from many of you these words, I want you to be reminded how challenging and how difficult it is. But also for many of you who know this, I don't want you to just kind of throw it by the wayside, thinking, yeah, this is how we should be, but we're not. But it's okay, but God's gracious. I do believe as he talks about love and how love is the mark of the Christian, for us especially who identify ourselves as Christians, the challenge really is, do you take this seriously? To love. Because if you take this seriously, this is how you change a hateful world, this is how you change a hateful heart. So Luke 6, verse 27, we'll read up to 36. But I say to you, this is Jesus speaking, I say to you who hear, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Let that sit. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who abuse you. To the one who strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. And from one who takes away your cloak, do not withhold your tunic either. Give to everyone who begs from you, and who begs from you, and from one who takes away your goods, do not demand them back. As you wish that others would do to you, do so to them. If you love those who love you, what benefit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who do good to you, what benefit is that to you? Even sinners do the same. And if you lend to those from whom you expect to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners to get back the same amount. But love your enemies, do good, and lend, expecting nothing in return, and your reward will be great. You will be sons of the Most High, for He is kind to the ungrateful and the evil. Be merciful, even as your Father is merciful. Heavy words. I wish this is one of those passages that we can just agree and say, let's do it. But for a lot of us, we agree, but then Monday hits and you see that coworker and you realize how challenging it is. The world will have two ways for you to approach love, right? The world will have two stages, the way that I see it, two stages of love. The first stage is it's guarded love. It's what I would call it's called guarded love. It's reciprocal. If they're good to you, you're good to them. Right? That's kind of like the way in which the world works. If they love you, you love them back. If they're good to you, you're good to them. If they are generous to you, you're generous to them. It's the Korean culture, right? You pay for the meal, but no one talks about it, but it's assumed the next time around that you'll pay for the meal. And so even though you kindly argue to pay for the food, you know that it kind of goes in a circle. It's guarded love. It's reciprocal. You do to those who are good to you, but they're bad to you. You also know it kind of gives you a right in one sense to do bad to them. I remember in junior high, I had a friend. We were leaving a football game, and this one friend, another guy, starts to mess with my other friend. And we're about to get picked up from our parents because we're in junior high. We don't, drive and like that. And so the friend's dad comes and gets in my friend's face to his son and says, "Is that kid messing with you? Hit him back." I remember thinking whoa, this is not what my parents have taught me and not what the church has taught me. I remember thinking that's so strange, but the more and more I get to know how the world works, even though you may not say it, that's really how you think. Well, if he did this, well, I don't have to do that. That's level one love. That's what it's expected. That's what gangsters do, right? You got my back, I got your back. Stage 2 love is what I would call passive love. It's not retaliating love. This is what we try to be in the world, right? It's the kind of love where if someone wrongs you, you take the higher ground and you don't do wrong to them, but you ignore them, right? It's what you would do is if someone hits you, you don't turn the other cheek, but you don't hit them back, right? And in this, the world thinks, oh, you're so benevolent. You're so good, right? That's kind of like, if there's this kind of love, the worldly love, stage 1 love, guarded love, then there's stage 2 love, where it talks about a passive, not retaliating love. It's what, what's her name? Taylor Swift sings about, right? Player's gonna hate, player's gonna play, hater's gonna hate, but what's she gonna do? Just shake it off, shake it off. And that's the motto, right? You shake it off, right? If someone cuts you off, just shake it off, right? That's passive love. You don't retaliate. But I want you to know this. The evil that we see in the world today, it's not because everyone is so evil and they're violent and they're criminals and they're stealing from the poor. The prevalent evil that we see today, such as trafficking, modern-day slavery, and poverty, it's not because everyone's stealing from the poor. It is because everyone lives a passive life, that nobody is generous. Everyone's only looking out for their own. And the world that we have is a world where trafficking, modern-day slavery exists, but also all the more in every generation, in every people group, in every nation, poverty has existed. I want you to think about that. Poverty has existed from the beginning of time. It's not just Korea today. It's not just Southeast Asia today or Africa today or some parts of America today. From the beginning of time, poverty has existed. Why? It's not because everyone's stealing from everybody else. It's because everyone lives by this standard of just guarded love or passive love. You don't really look out for your own. You don't really look out for each other. And I want you to be able to see that's what we're striving for. That's what we politicians and all these people, that's what they say. They say this is what we need to strive for. But then you realize that's not good enough. And that's why Jesus talks about this kind of love. He addresses that basic worldview that we have of love, and then he skips the second level of not retaliating, passive love. And then he talks about the third stage of love, which is a completely different kind of love. It's active and vulnerable. So what he's saying here is this, right, in these verses. If someone hates you, love them, right? If someone curses you, pray for our enemies. That's what he is saying. Jesus is saying, I know how difficult it is. That's why it's the first lesson I'm teaching you. That you need to know that you need God. But from there, I'm going to tell you what the hardest thing is, to love your neighbor. And you will realize how difficult and how impossible that is. Jesus knew. He wasn't an impractical idealist. He was being a practical realist. He was saying, this is what the world needs. Not hate on hate and then hate on hate. But when you experience hate, you're radically different, and then you love. And Jesus teaches, his first major lesson is this, that the disciple, those who confess and profess that you are a Christian, you follow Jesus, this has to be the mark of your life. Right? This has to be the mark of your life. And I want you to let that sink in. Because especially for those of you who grew up in the church, you behave. The standard is like the world. If anything, you'll shake it off. And you think you're being a good Christian. You're being a good follower of Jesus. But I want this to sink in, that when you're wronged in the workplace, when a friend betrays you, the way that you live life is not just to shake it off, but you live radically different. You love those who hate you. This is a standard of the Christian. And just make a side note. This is not for government officials. This is not for soldiers, and this is not for policemen. Yes, they should still be respectful. Yes, they should still honor the law. But God has put them in authority for a reason. What Jesus is teaching here is for disciples in day-to-day life. How you should live and how you should respond. And I want you to know this. As you try to live it out, it will be hard. Love is not found in yourself. That's why Jesus talks about, blessed are those who are poor. Because when you realize that you're poor, not just in this world, but in your heart, spiritually, that you need God, the first lesson is you need God. Second lesson is you need to love your neighbor, and you can't love your neighbor apart from God. That's what he is saying. So what do you do? There's two more lessons that we'll look into. The way in which we love is rooted in two things. Love is rooted in the future, and love is rooted in the Father. Okay, tell your neighbor, love is rooted in the future. You need to understand this. That love is rooted not based on how things will play out today, but love is rooted in the future, specifically future justice. Verse 35, but love your enemies and do good and lend, expecting nothing in return. So this is generous. This is generosity to the extreme, expecting nothing in return, and your reward will be great. and you will be sons of the Most High, for He is kind to the ungrateful and the evil. What Jesus is saying is this: to be so generous, to be so loving, that you're actively doing it. But as you're actively doing it, you put yourself in positions that you're vulnerable. You may give in such a way that it actually hurts you. Right? You actually love in such a way that you may be hurt again. That's what he is saying. But the reason that he's saying we should be able to do this is your reward will be great. And this is not works legalism here. He's not saying if you do good today, then you'll be rewarded in heaven, because he's already talking to disciples, those who are following Jesus. What he is saying is because you're disciples, you will have a reward. That's what he's saying. And he's saying, think about that reward. That you have a Father in heaven who knows all that you do. And as you're generous to some, to many, as you love many, and as you will, in a lot of ways, not experience a fair life where you give more than you receive, what Jesus is saying is you do that by living for the future justice. Because it's unfair, and I want you to know that. It's unfair for us to live like this if there is no afterlife. If this is all that we have, I will be a proponent of you fight for what you want. Survival of the fittest. Look out for yourself. But you need to understand, I need to understand, we need to understand how difficult it is, because injustice is something that's true to our hearts. Right? And so when you've been wronged, it will scream, your heart will scream out, this is unfair. Right? When you experience injustice, when someone hates you, cusses you out, you will want to say, this is wrong. And everything within you will want justice, which is actually a good thing. And then the way in which you can love them is to love them is to know that God, He will care for you. There is a reward in heaven. He knows. And so that desire for that injustice to be righted, you can love that person and be generous to them, to know that one day, whether it was on the cross or on Judgment Day, that God will take care of it all. The image is this. You're walking on a street, some drunk guy, comes in your face, starts to push you. Maybe he wants something from you. Maybe he wants to steal your wallet, so he pushes you, he tries to take it from you. But you don't hit him back. You don't push him back. Why? Because behind him, you see a police officer coming towards you. And so you know you don't have to defend yourself, because a police officer will defend you. You see, we are men and women who are wired to understand what justice is. You don't have to teach kids. I don't have to teach my twins. If I give one to one son and not to the other, they know it's unfair. That's what they say. They know it. Because justice is something that we crave. When you've been wronged, you want justice. The way in which you overlook it and love them is to know that there's future justice coming. Love is rooted in the future, but also love is rooted in the Father. Verse 36. It says, "Be merciful, even as your Father is merciful." Before it talks about love. Love in this way. That word that Luke uses, that Jesus uses, in the Greek, it's the word for love, for agape. If you know Greek, there's different words that they use to characterize certain aspects of love. There's eros, it's the romantic love. It's what you read about in romantic novels, or it's romantic comedy. That's what it's about. Eros love. It's something, you see something beautiful, you're attracted to it. That's eros love. And then there's filial love. It's a brotherly love. It's still beautiful, but this kind of love is developed over time. Right? It's what happens with actual family. You spend time together, and you don't like them, but you love them. right? That's what this is talking about. It's brotherly love. You don't call them out to hang out on Friday night, but if he's in the hospital, you'll go there. It's brotherly love. This word, and here, when Jesus talks about love those who hate you, it's agape love. It's a kind of love that God's love is often described as. It's one-sided love. It's vulnerable love. It's active love. You go out of your way to love. It's a kind of love that as you love them, they're changed. That's agape love. As you love them, they're being transformed. It's this kind of love that the Bible calls us to. And that's when it makes sense when it says, be merciful as your Father has been merciful. The idea is, as God has shown mercy on you, you show mercy. As God has loved you, you love others. It's the mercy of God that He's calling us to. You know, before I said this is completely irrational, right? It's a completely irrational kind of love. Until you've experienced that grace. Right? Before you would think this is completely irrational. Who loves those who hate you? Nobody. Until you realize that's what God's done for you. And that's when you start to say, it's not right, but it's beautiful. I don't understand it, but I want to do it. I want justice, but I want to show grace. I want to show mercy. I want to show love. It's the kind of love that we need in the world, where Martin Luther King Jr. does say it's this kind of love that will save a civilization. And we've seen this. Let me actually highlight how we've seen this in the past century. We first know of Martin Luther King Jr. and his speech on how he really led a transformation within the culture, not through violence, but by what? By vulnerable, strong love. Gandhi's done this. He's led a liberation in India from the British rule by being peaceful, a peaceful protester. We've seen this in Germany, where prayerful Protestant churches for a decade prayed, protested, not out of violence, but peacefully, which led to the Berlin Wall falling, which eventually led to the collapse of the Soviet Union. You see how powerful this is. It's this kind of radical love that changes a civilization. It's the truth and reconciliation movement that we see in the apartheid in South Africa, where it changed a bloodbath of killing and racial revenge. You've seen this over and over again, and this is what the best stories are made of. It's that kind of love. It's one-sided. It's vulnerable. It's not fair. But you know that love leads to change. And that's the love that God had for us, isn't it? Jesus, on the way to the cross, knowing that Judas would betray him, still served him. Still served him. Jesus, as he's about to be taken, and Peter cuts off the soldier's ear, what does he do? He takes that ear, heals him. For Jesus, this is literal. Right? I wonder what the soldier thought, right? Going home. Honey, how's your day? It was kind of crazy. This guy I was going after cut off my ear and he healed it. And that's it. Just loved me. Jesus, being persecuted, being put on the cross, what does he say? Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they do. Is it not the gospel that changed our hearts? Is it not Jesus' love that changes a civilization? His disciples did this, right? They gave up their life. Not because they had to, they wanted to. They wanted to give and to love. Stephen, the first martyr, the first one killed for his faith, repeats the word of Jesus and says, Lord, Jesus, receive my spirit. And falling on his knees, in Acts 7 says, Lord, do not hold this against them. Who does this? We've heard these stories, we may be moved by it, but the call is, it's time for us as people to take it seriously and to love radically. Because what hatred will do is it will consume you. It's so interesting, the Beatitude talks about being blessed. Right? Blessed are those who are poor. Blessed means supremely happy, supremely joyful. And then the first thing it talks about is loving your enemy. Think about that. What he is saying is this: you're blessed. If you're truly blessed, you can love your enemy, forgive them. Because what hatred will do is it will consume you. All you'll be thinking about is revenge. All you'll be thinking about is how you can get them back. It traps you in a cycle of revenge. Martin Luther King talks about how it's the picture of two scorpions in a jar, just trying to kill each other. And that's the world. This is why marriages are often destroyed, because they're unable to forgive and to love. It's this cycle of unforgiveness, hatred, bitterness. And Jesus offers us a way out. To not live in this kind of bitterness, but to love and to be liberated and to be free and to bless. Let me close with one more story that Martin Luther King shares about. As he is the man, right, who preached this, lived this, and led a revolution of men and women who would love radically. He was driving to Tennessee from Atlanta with his brother. And it was this dark road that they were driving in. And every car that came his way had their bright lights on, their headlights. And so as his brother AD is driving, he sees these bright lights, gets getting annoyed one after the other. Why aren't they turning it off? And no one seems to be turning off their bright headlights. So his brother, being angry, he says, you know what I'm going to do? The next car that comes around, I'm going to refuse to turn on my lights. I'm going to make sure that they see these lights. And then Martin Luther King responds, oh no, don't do that. That'd be too much light on this highway. It will end up in mutual destruction for all. Somebody has to have some sense on this highway. And he goes on to say these words: men must see that force begets force, hate begets hate, toughness begets toughness. And it is all a descending spiral, ultimately ending in destruction for all and for everybody. Somebody must have sense enough for morality, to cut off the chain of hate and cut off the chain of evil in this universe. And you do that by love. Love is the only way forward. Let's pray.